Bumbaco. My name is Lori Bumbaco. I'm an oncology dietitian. I work here at Cancer Wellness Center part-time, and this is one of my favorite programs. It's called Ask the Dietitian. That's me. The reason why it's my favorite program is that it gives our participants the opportunity to ask great questions, and they never seem to fail at that task. They always put me on the spot and challenge me and ask some really interesting questions that I have the opportunity to try to answer to the best of my ability. The reason why this is my favorite program, as I just shared, it gives you the chance to really share your voice and your questions. I just worked with someone yesterday who expressed concern while she's on chemo. She said, I hate to bother my care team with my questions. And I assured her to the best of my ability that that isn't the case, that we're never bothered and you should never feel like your questions go unanswered. So I always encourage anyone I'm working with to advocate for themselves and to really make sure that you feel that your needs and your questions and your concerns are being addressed in the best way possible. So as it relates to nutrition, that matters because we get so much misinformation, right? On a regular basis, we're exposed to it from online sources, whether it be social media or we do a Google search or we hear things, right? So I want to be the person you ask those questions to. I want to be the person that you trust for reliable, accurate, up-to-date information. And so that's why we run this program once a month, sometimes more frequently, depending on the topic of interest. Sometimes our topics are so popular, we get so many questions that we have to run a part 2, which is what's happening today. So for May, we decided to choose the topic plant-based food choices. And as you can imagine, it's a very popular topic. So this is our part 2 for the month. If you missed part 1, have no fear. You can go on our YouTube channel. So just look up Cancer Wellness Center on YouTube, and you could watch any video that's ever been recorded for the center. So not just my Ask the Dietitian videos, but all of the other wonderful programs and services that are offered here often are recorded, so you can view them at your own time. So I encourage you to do that. I often do it on my own. And it's a wonderful way to kind of view things at your own pace also, and even just kind of backtrack or take good notes if you want. So what I'm going to do is share my screen, and I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation. Anyone who registers for my programs has access to those materials. So you will get a copy of the PowerPoint. Very often I try to include some recipes because I think it's important to translate this information into practical ways, right? So if we're going to live this way and eat these foods, I want to help you do that too. So I have just a few recipes that I'm going to also share with those of you who registered. If you're joining us and watching on Facebook, welcome, and thank you for watching. And I'm going to share my screen now. And bring over, just give me 1 second, my PowerPoint. And thank you again for attending or watching live. This is Ask the Dietitian, Plant-Based Food Choices Part 2. And on the agenda today, I want to first start with a quick review. I did this in part 1. What is a plant-based diet that I'm going to also refer to as a PBD moving forward throughout the slides? I'm going to list the questions that were unanswered from part 1, provide the answers to the best of my ability to all of those great questions, and then offer some additional resources and recipes for you to sort of explore this on your own. So I have a question for you. This is not always Ask the Dietitian. This is the dietitian asks questions too. So I have a true or false. A plant-based diet is vegetarian. Is that true or false? So those of you who have attended my programs or worked with me one-on-one understand this to be false, that plant-based diets are not necessarily only vegetarian. They can be, but experts agree that a plant-based diet is one that is built around whole plant foods. That's what you're eating most of the time, these whole plant foods. So that would include vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds. And it does sometimes include smaller amounts of dairy, meat, fish, and poultry. So great examples of plant-based diets are ones listed here. So flexitarian, if you've never heard of that, it's sort of like, it is what it sounds like. It's a flexible vegetarian. So like you might be vegetarian here and there. A pescatarian, lacto-ovo vegetarian, and even the Mediterranean diet, the ever popular Mediterranean diet, is a great example of a plant-based diet because it adheres to what the experts are describing. that most of the foods that are consumed come from plant sources. Now, what makes a plant-based diet so special? It provides the maximum amount of vitamins, minerals, fiber, antioxidants, and phytochemicals that we could consume. And it's also relatively lower in calories, which may help us manage our weight. And that has implications for cancer protection, but also some other of our chronic diseases as well. Now, the jury is still out whether or not a vegan diet, which means no animal foods at all, is that necessary for the optimal protection? Or can we just eat a plant-based diet, which means we're still eating some animal food some of the time? We don't think that a vegan diet is superior to a plant-based diet. And we actually can reap all of the benefits, nutritionally speaking, and disease protection-wise, from a plant-based diet. Now, here's the thing, not any plant-based diet will do. So if we replace animal-based choices with plant-based alternatives, we don't want to automatically assume that they're better for us. A plant-based diet could be high in processed and sugary foods. Think about it, right? So research has actually looked into this and has suggested that eating this way, eating a plant-based diet that's highly processed and includes a lot of sugary foods, that is associated with the risk for type 2 diabetes, having a greater BMI or body mass index, and then also having higher triglyceride levels. So really, ideally, if we're going to pursue a plant-based diet, we want to choose those choices that are minimally processed. Those are generally more nutritious for us. All right, let's get into the amazing questions that our participants asked for the month of May. This individual asked a large study showing the benefits on cancer prevention and what types of cancer. I think that's a great question. Best plant-based options for abdominal cancer surgery recovery. This one's a lengthy one, so bear with me. If you avoid spinach, which is a high oxalate food, do you need to be concerned about kidney stones from consuming other foods with oxalates? Is there something you can do to prevent kidney stones? What plant-based products are good substitutes for sugar? What are the 5 best foods for cancer patients? Now you're really putting me on the spot there. Is eating high fiber foods during chemotherapy a good alternative to using laxatives? Are you aware of any plant-based food delivery services? How to still eat enough protein if you cannot eat legumes? I know green vegetables are best, but are potatoes something to avoid? In parentheses, I like potatoes. I like them too. They're delicious, aren't they? I just had them last night for dinner. Is it better to eat cooked vegetables to avoid possible contamination of raw vegetables while our immune system is suppressed from cancer treatment? And then lastly, how much tofu and edamame are okay to eat? I got a lot of questions this month about tofu, edamame, and soy products. So I included one of those questions for this part 2, because I thought it was important to reinforce the message about the questions that are lingering for those foods. Okay, so let's go to that first question. The large studies that show the benefits on cancer prevention and what types of cancer. So plant-based diets and cancer risk. Here's what we see from the research. Plant-based diets, and it's difficult to study this because there's different iterations of plant-based diets, right? So I think that's what makes it a challenge to know definitively how well they are protecting us or not, because when we look at people who eat quote unquote plant-based, it could be vegan, it could be a lacto-ovo vegetarian, it could be a flexitarian, it could be someone eating the Mediterranean diet. So we got to lump all that together. And that's why I think we still need a little bit more time to kind of collect the type of data that we're looking for. But in the meantime, we're really excited because plant-based diets are associated with reducing the risk for any type of cancer. Isn't that interesting? So there was an interesting research study. It was a prospective analysis, and it was done in the UK, but they took close over 470,000 individuals, and they followed them throughout the course. I think it was like through over 11 years. And then they saw for those people, whatever they were eating, did they get cancer or not? So they, from that study over time, could find that all types of cancer, there might be some exceptions, that there might be some rare cancers that they weren't able to capture, but for those individuals, that's what they found, that the plant-based diet compared to those eating animal foods, that was more protective. from any type of cancer. Now, here's what we already know from solid evidence. So we're convinced about this. We know that for colorectal cancer, eating too much red meat is associated with risk. Also, for colorectal cancer, we know that eating processed meat is associated with an increased risk. So for any individual who's at risk or who has been diagnosed with colorectal cancer, very often we put some limits on how much red meat they consume in a week. And then we try to talk about shifts away from highly processed forms of animal foods. For postmenopausal breast cancer, the researchers think that some of the benefit from a plant-based diet may also be partly related to the fact that they have reduced weight. Because when those individuals eat plant-based diets, we see that some individuals that do that seem to manage their weight better, and that is relevant for postmenopausal breast cancer risk. So there might be like a combined effect there. And then lastly, for prostate cancer, we see that there is a benefit from eating fatty fish. Interesting, right? So in a plant-based diet that includes some fatty fish, that may be protective in developing prostate cancer. Interesting, right? So you see all cancers are different, and I'm going to talk about that in a question coming up. So this study is hot off the press. I don't know if anyone saw it. It was released this week, so it's probably hitting like mainstream media, I'm assuming. It came across my email. That's how I discovered it. This was a great article. It reviewed 50 reviews, systematic reviews, and meta-analyses. So about 50 of them. And those types of papers are, if you've ever heard of them, a systematic review or a meta-analysis or a review paper, it takes like a collection of studies. So we're talking about a lot of research studies here, okay? Now, what did this review find? Here basically is the summary. They found that vegetarian and vegan diets are significantly associated with better lipid profile, glycemic control, so that's our blood sugar control, with body weight and BMI, as well as inflammation, and the lowered risk for ischemic heart disease and cancer, all types of cancer. So good to know, right? So we see that there's some mechanisms that play here. So this review was specifically looking at cardiovascular disease and cancer together. So they were hoping to see from those studies, that's what they picked out of the lump sum of studies. They were looking at cardiovascular disease and cancer. But look at what they found. So they found better lipid panels, better blood sugar control, better weight, and according to how we define that, and then also reduced inflammation. So we know that that's all implicated also for cancer risk. So at least we know now that these vegetarian and plant-based diets seem to be beneficial through those mechanisms at play. If you are curious to look at that article for yourself, I included the link. So those of you registered, you can literally click on that link and it'll pull that up for you. Now, I said this earlier during the introduction, it's not just any plant-based diet that'll do. This is another research study that was published, I believe, just a few years ago, and I thought it was a great research study in a renowned nutrition journal. Here's what they found, that following a healthy plant-based diet was associated with a lower risk for pancreatic cancer, while following a less healthy plant-based diet was associated with a higher risk of pancreatic cancer, excuse me. And how do we know like what a healthy plant-based diet is? So they use a lot of tools, but one of them is what they call a healthy eating index. And that really, the best way I can describe it is like the quality of someone's diet. So food that is minimally processed is higher in quality because it retains more nutrition, it has more fiber, it has more vitamins and minerals, more antioxidants, more phytochemicals. Those are all cancer protective. As soon as we start processing foods, we lose those nutrients, those precious compounds, and we gain things like sugar, salt, and added fats, right? So as soon as we start processing even a plant-based version, it's still going to happen, right? No matter what the origin is. And so here's some good examples, right? These are all vegan choices, like a vegan Big Mac or a vegan chicken waffle sandwich or a vegan carrot. It's not a carrot dog. It's actually a plant-based hot dog. I think like hopefully what you're seeing and the point that I'm trying to make is that we want to think about really the basics and the essentials of a plant-based diet, which means minimally processed and whole foods, as close to the whole form as possible. So here's some other images of processed foods, because I get a lot of questions about the processing of our foods. So I think fruits are like a good example there. The images aren't so clear to tell, but like some from an apple, which is minimally, it's unprocessed, it's not even minimally processed, to applesauce, which arguably could be an okay choice, right, in a healthy diet, to apple juice. Apple juice would be ultra processed, and the ultra processed category is what we're looking to try to minimize as much as possible. Another good example for the fats are taking peanut butter or peanuts in the whole form to peanut butter cookies. We kind of know, right? We know those ultra processed foods when we see them. I see chicken nuggets, I see corn chips or corn flakes. So ultra processed foods are the lowest in diet quality. And the examples here you see like some chicken nuggets, chicken tenders, there's some flavored yogurts, fruit juice, vegetables made with highly processed ingredients. The list goes on and on. We just want to minimize these as much as possible. Now, a separate from plant-based diet, I love how we're still on the first question. I'm still going. We want to think about the lifestyle. So plant-based diet plus. So what else can we incorporate to really maximize cancer protection? Physical activity, reducing sugary beverages, right? Because technically they're plant-based, but we want to reduce sugary beverages. We want to reduce and eliminate processed meat. We want to reduce fast food. We want to reduce alcohol consumption. This is a great study published. It was an NCI study. It was a little over 11 years. They took 175,000 Americans aged 50 to 71 years. And the closer they followed all of these recommendations, the lower their risk for mortality from cancer and CVD, cardiovascular disease. So what those authors of that study, which is cited here, what they also pointed out is that it seemed like physical activity, body weight, and the intake of plant foods were the most predominant components that offered the greatest amount of protection to someone's lifestyle. So that's why working with a dietitian is helpful. Maybe you're not ready to reduce alcohol intake. You still want a glass of wine here and there. Maybe we can highlight and focus on the more important components that seem to lend the greatest protection, and we can move forward from there and maybe eventually address some of those other concerns. And that's the link. So again, you could just click on that link and it brings you right to that study. So next question, best plant-based options for abdominal cancer surgery recovery. It all depends. The location and the extent of the surgery will determine specific instructions about what to eat and avoid. And that's why your surgeon and your surgical team will tell you specifically what you are advised to eat. In general, though, a bland diet that is limited in fiber is recommended for as little as 2 weeks up to as many as 8 weeks after surgery, again, depending on the extent of the surgery. Sometimes if surgery is higher up in the abdomen, we may recommend limiting fat and concentrated sweets, especially if it's involving the gallbladder, the stomach, or the pancreas. Sometimes the esophagus too, the lower esophagus. You can pursue a high quality plant-based diet by choosing foods that have relatively less fiber and by thoroughly cooking veggies. And that's often what I do with individuals I work with in clinic. So after surgery, this is kind of like what it would look like. We would have grains and foods made from grains that are less than 3 grams of fiber per serving. You can incorporate tofu and smooth nut butters, right? Those are plant-based. Soy milk and pea protein milk alternatives for the protein. Some of the vegetables and fruits have to be looked a little bit closer, right? So things that are cooked well without their seeds or skins, and we give very specific lists. I'm not going to go into detail today about that. Small amounts of sweet potato. Again, we're removing the high fiber content by removing the skin, straining some vegetable juice. Here's some of the fruits that are well tolerated: ripe bananas, melons, peeled apples, canned fruit, except for pineapple, which is normally a really great choice, but a little too high in fiber after surgery. And then from there, gradually, someone will eventually add more fiber back as tolerated, as the gut heals, and pursue a plant-based diet that is ample in the amounts of fiber that we would normally recommend. Next question, if you avoid spinach, which is a high oxalate food, do you need to be concerned about kidney stones from consuming other foods with oxalates? Is there something you can do to prevent kidney stones? Well, this isn't necessarily an oncology question, so I had to put on my other kidney hat related to kidney stones. So there absolutely is medical nutrition therapy for kidney stones, and diet can influence the formation and growth of kidney stones. Depending on your individual risk factors and on the type of kidney stones that you particularly form, you may be advised to make changes. So here are the risk factors for kidney stone formation. There's a lot. So high urine calcium, low urine volume, meaning not making a lot of urine, low calcium intake, not eating a lot of calcium, high urine uric acid, high urine magnesium, high salt intake, high urine oxalate, low urine citrate, high calcium intake, which is funny, right? High acid urine, low fruit and vegetable intake, and then a high acid load in the diet. So sometimes what we do is we work with the care team to determine what your specific risk factors are. And if you, as the individual who wrote in this question, you want to take these couple of slides to your care team to say, like, what are my risk factors? What are the things I need to be specifically concerned about? And then that's where we can start making a better plan for you individually. So if we want to increase urine volume, we got to drink more fluids, right? So typically 2 liters of urine or more is the goal. So that's going to mean different amounts of fluid intake for different people, but essentially that is the goal, to help kind of make sure that enough urine is being produced. You can reduce urine calcium by reducing salt, and I think most of us would benefit from reducing the salt in our diet. You can also reduce urine calcium by balancing out the diet. So this means eating smaller amounts of animal foods, as it turns out, with larger amounts of fruits and vegetables. That sounds like a plant-based diet, right? You could reduce urine oxalate by eating or drinking something with about 300 milligrams of calcium at each meal and snack. Have you heard about that? What happens is that the calcium binds with the oxalate. So the oxalate is not going to do any damage, or it's going to have less damage, which is really fascinating. We still would advise that you eat fewer high oxalate foods. So this person identified that spinach is one, but also rhubarb, beets, potato chips, French fries, and nuts and butter versions of nuts typically are higher in oxalate. Sometimes we can pick and choose and be strategic about this. It's not fair for me to go into that during the presentation today, but on a one-on-one basis, I could do that with you. And then the other important thing to do is to stop taking vitamin C supplements. That can raise urine oxalate. So if you are doing that, I would advise this individual also attempt to reduce urine oxalate by stopping vitamin C supplementation. Which plant-based products are good substitutes for sugar? So sugar is a plant-based choice, isn't it? Here's another true or false question. Just because something that is plant-based automatically makes it a healthy option. Hopefully you've learned this is false, right? So sugar is naturally plant-based, what do you know? But does that make it a healthy option? Maybe not in excess, right? Maybe sparingly here and there, sugar is acceptable, right? And more to that story, experts advise that we limit added sugars to 6 to 10% of calories from our diet. Here in the States, experts recommend 10%, but overseas, they recommend 6%. So they might be a little stricter overseas with those guidelines, and maybe we might want to follow those guidelines. That's just my suggestion. Alternatively, if you're looking for numbers that you can work in a more manageable way, I could calculate everything out for you. But alternatively, what is helpful is less than 6 teaspoons per day of added sugars if you're a female, and less than 9 teaspoons of added sugars per day if you're a male. Now, just FYI, 1 teaspoon of added sugar is equal to 4 grams of added sugar. So we're going to talk more about that in a moment. So on a label, we can learn how much added sugar we have and how it might fit in our budget or not, right? So on this label here, you see 10 grams of added sugar. That's the word that we're looking for, those words, added sugar, right? Not total sugars, but we're looking for added sugars. That's what we want to be concerned about. So for 10 grams, if you recall, 4 grams is the equivalent of a teaspoon, right? So in this particular serving, which is 2/3 of a cup, that's not very large. That means this product has 2.5 teaspoons of added sugar. And if you're a female eating this product, you've almost reached half of your budget for the day in this measly 2/3 of a cup. So you might want to compare labels. I would say this item is high in added sugar. So I would maybe look at other labels, see if there's an alternative that you can swap out for, or maybe purchase a version of this that doesn't add the sugar and you add your own sugar, because you could maybe add a teaspoon instead of 2.5 to your 2/3 of a cup. Just a thought. And you can also sweeten with other natural sweet flavors. Everyone always asks me questions like, how do I get sweet without these added sugars? So, purees of fruit and then also dried fruit. Fruit itself, especially when it's in season, it's local, is so sweet. And if we can retrain our taste buds, we can learn that that's sweet enough for us. Next question, what are the 5 best foods for cancer patients? Yeah, you stumped me here. How am I supposed to answer this? I'm supposed to pick only 5? So I mentioned I would come back to this point earlier, that depending on the cancer type, I'm going to make different recommendations. So it depends. I might recommend different food choices for different cancer types. And we know this from preclinical data. So from in vitro research, but then also in animal studies and some observational studies in human, we see that some foods matter. And there might be a mechanism very unique and specific to the cancer type that's influencing it. So, for example, I might make a recommendation very differently for a gentleman who is diagnosed with prostate cancer compared to someone who's diagnosed with colorectal cancer. They're 2 very different cancer types, and I would make 2 very different recommendations there. But if I'm forced to answer, I'm going to sort of cheat my way through this question. I would list, here's my top 5. I would say non-starchy vegetables, right? Instead of a specific food, I'm giving you a group, okay? So I would list cruciferous vegetables, leafy greens, tomatoes, summer squash, bell peppers as ranking very highly in the non-starchy veggie category. They're all kind of standouts on their own. So imagine, rather than just picking one of them, combine forces, and add all of these foods together as part of your overall diet. And then starchy vegetables. So, maybe something like potatoes or sweet potatoes or winter squash and peas. They are a little bit higher in calorie, a little bit higher in carbohydrate, but not any less nutritious for us. And even some protein, right, in those peas. How about fruits? I would recommend citrus and berries. They're superstars in that category. And then our whole grains, especially intact whole grains, meaning they're not processed at all. It's like it's unprocessed. We can't even call it minimally processed. So things like quinoa or oat groats, and you've seen them, millet, those are technically, they're so small, we can't process them basically. And then beans and lentils. And I would advise like maybe dried or those beans and lentils that are prepared with less salt or sodium. So definitely there are some convenient products that are available to us that are prepared that way. Okay, so those are my top 5, but here's a bonus. I would say herbs and spices. I would say I forget about them in my own clinical practice, but they are unique and they have exceptional cancer protective properties to them as well. And a little bit goes a long way. And we don't even have to get fancy. Like good old freshly ground black pepper is anti-inflammatory. And, I think when we can add that to our cancer protective plate, we're only enhancing again those properties that we're delivering into our body and infusing even more nutrition. All right, next question. Is eating a high fiber diet during chemo a good alternative to laxatives? I think this is a great question. Let's talk about constipation though first. So we define this as having no bowel movement within 3 days. Now, I would say, again, everyone is unique. Some people I work with, that's their normal. They normally only ever go every 3 days or maybe every 2 days. But then I work with people who go twice a day. That's their normal. So during treatment, we want to stay as close to your normal as possible. Okay, so just keep that in mind. But if you haven't had a bowel movement and it's been 3 days, you're constipated, right? So that means medical intervention is necessary. So here's what we know about fiber. It helps us to maintain regularity and maintain normal bowel movements. So good to know about that fiber. But if we're constipated, and really we're defining this as no bowel movement in 3 days, fiber is only going to make the situation worse, right? So if we start trying to eat a lot more fiber, we're going to feel more uncomfortable. We're going to have bloating. We're going to have gas. We might get cramping. So I would advise low fiber actually if you're constipated and to do what the medical team recommends. And sometimes laxatives are necessary. Sometimes a better approach is to be proactive, right? And so to consider stool softeners as maybe necessary so that you don't get constipated, right? And then once a laxative is used and you've had a successful bowel movement, or you have a bowel protocol in place where you're taking some stool softeners, you can use fiber then. So you can be, again, strategic. It's all about timing. So once you've gone and you're having regular bowel movements, increasing the fiber is going to help you have more normal regular bowel movements more often. So I like to recommend like this 3-step approach: to start the day with a bowl of hot cereal, to drink plenty of fluids throughout the day. That definitely helps with constipation. Sometimes warm fluids are advised. Some people benefit from warm fluids, it seems like. So a cup of coffee in the morning or a couple cups of hot tea, broth and soups, those are all helpful to induce peristalsis. So that tells our gut to kind of start moving a little bit. And then lastly, to include 1 high fiber food per day in addition to what you're already eating. And I very often recommend ground flax seeds because they're so versatile and easy to incorporate into almost anything that you're already eating. So it's not a big ask to add these ground flax seeds. And they seem to have this ability to promote bowel regularity. So that hopefully that will be helpful for the person that asked that question. Are you aware of any plant-based food delivery services? I am. There's so many. The options are endless. I can't vouch for these. I've never taken advantage of them myself, but I think the decisions that you make are based on your budget, your skill set, and your nutrition need. And again, that's where a dietitian can help. But I would say if I were to list my top 5, here they are. So you can look these up and kind of decide on your own. There's Purple Carrot, there's Hungry Root, Splendid Spoon, Green Chef. I've heard pretty good things about Green Chef. And also Mosaic, which I think is a newer one to the market. Each of these have like different options, right? So maybe you want to do a few meals during the week, or maybe you want to do a meal a day. You know, you get to kind of decide. You can price that out for yourself. Maybe you want to have a family to feed. And so you want to see for yourself, is that an option? Some of these are meal kits. Some of them are ready-made. So all you have to do is just reheat them. They might come frozen and then you just reheat them for yourself. So you got to decide, but each of these are great, I think, in terms of options. And if you're ready to explore, most of these are vegan. So if you're looking to incorporate some vegan meals into your diet and still pursue a plant-based diet, maybe you start your day with eggs, and then you have your grain bowl for lunch, but then you have a purple carrot meal for dinner, and you had a vegan dinner. That's a plant-based day, right? So it's really up to you to decide, but hopefully those will be helpful for you. How do you still eat enough protein if you cannot eat legumes? I feel like I keep getting this type of question. So how do we do that? Well, here's the thing. I want to share this very quickly. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So when we break protein down to its most basic form, it is amino acids. So they build up together to form a protein. And our bodies require 9 amino acids for health and function. So we call them essential, meaning we cannot manufacture them. We need to eat those 9. The protein in our body, in our food, has different amounts and types of amino acids. So the amino acid distribution profile is less optimal in plant foods than in animal foods. And that's important for you to know, but also why that myth, where that myth stems from in terms of we can't eat enough protein on a vegan diet, when we definitely can. However, we just want to know that it's that amino acids, the amounts and the types, the profile in plant foods is not the same as animal foods. Animal foods are where it's at. That's where we find the most types in terms of those 9 and the greatest amounts. So that's good to know. And here's the specific example. So when we eat whole grains, we're not getting a lot of lysine. That's one of the amino acids. And then in our legumes, so our beans and lentils, we're not getting a lot of methionine or cysteine. Okay, so those are all essential. We have to make sure we're eating enough of them. We could eventually develop a protein deficiency if we don't eat enough of those foods or amino acids, sorry. So if someone, for example, is eating a plant-based diet and ate only rice or ate only beans every day, this could be a problem, right? Eventually long-term, because they wouldn't be eating enough of one of those essential amino acids. So what do we do then, right? So just going back, lysine is low in grains and methionine and cysteine are low in legumes. This person's not eating a lot of legumes, can't eat them, right? So we want to remember that. Lysine is found highest in these plant-based choices. So pumpkin seeds, tofu, See how I snuck that in there? It's technically a legume. Almonds, quinoa, cauliflower. So if you eat these foods and eat them regularly, you're going to get some lysine. And you could maybe even every day, I would choose one of these, right? And try to eat them every day. Now for methionine and cysteine, we also find them highest in these plant foods. So what do you know? Tofu's on the list again, and soy milk. So if this person can't eat legumes, but maybe could drink soy milk, you're covered. You're definitely getting your essential amino acids. But if you can't, then Brazil nuts and sunflower seeds, and then also cashews. So it's funny, it seems like these nuts and seeds really make up the bulk of these amino acids that we require. So I would say grab, get big bags of them. They're pretty versatile. You could top almost anything you eat with like a little handful of seeds or just snack on them. A lot of times I buy them raw and roast them in a saute pan, and they're delicious. It could be a great way for you to make sure you're eating enough of the amino acids. 2 more questions. I know green vegetables are best, but are potatoes something to avoid? I like them. Why are we afraid of potatoes? So they're vilified due to a high glycemic index, right? They have carbs. However, they are a package of nutrition. So we know potatoes are high in vitamin C. They give us like a quarter of what we need for vitamin C, a quarter of what we need for potassium in a day. And if we eat the skin, we're also getting a lot of fiber. So I would recommend that you enjoy potatoes that are prepared in ways that are more healthful, roasting, baking, air frying them. 35% of our potato crop turns into French fries. So that's an ultra processed food, right? Technically vegan, right? But ultra processed. 28% is used for fresh food and 13% turns into chips. So it seems like the majority of the potatoes we're using turns into ultra processed food. So if we think about how to enjoy potatoes more closely to their original form and preparing them in delicious ways, like roasting them, oh, so delicious. And then incorporating that as part of a balanced meal, right? So we're not just eating the potatoes. We're going to have maybe a plant-based protein and then some non-starchy vegetables, and boom, we have this delicious, nutritious, well-balanced meal. We don't need to be afraid of potatoes. So just here's some other veggies, right? So if you're thinking about eating vegetables that are going to be cancer protective and you're worried, you feel like you need to eat leafy greens, I would highlight that these are on this list of what we call foods that fight. So carrots, cauliflower, winter squash, asparagus, tomatoes. Besides the leafy greens, these are all really superstars in their own right. So I would recommend that you also incorporate these as often as you can, along with the potatoes. Second to last question, I lied. Is it better to eat cooked vegetables to avoid possible contamination of raw vegetables while our immune system is suppressed from cancer treatment? This is a great question. I answer this one a lot in clinic. It's sort of a myth. So a lot of people feel that in order to protect themselves from foodborne illness, they have to cook everything and cook it to death, right? Not so. So the FDA has this really great guidebook. I'm actually going to send it out after the program today, where they list the foods to avoid and the foods to eat if you're on active treatment and you're worried about immunocompromise. So hopefully what you notice on the foods to eat list, I see it right there in the middle, washed produce or cooked produce. So as long as you wash your produce properly, and this guidebook explains how to do that, then you are safe. You're protecting yourself from foodborne illness, okay? Uncooked sprouts are more risky. So I very often, and you see that on the foods to avoid, we want to cook our sprouts. So that's the only exception in the world of produce. If we're immunocompromised, we want to cook our sprouts compared to eating them raw. They just have an increased risk, right? They're a little more risky for us to eat. Now, last question, how much tofu and edamame are okay to eat? I think this is a great question, another one that I get asked very often. So is it safe to eat soy foods? It is, and I explained that several times in part 1. So I why not explain it again? Because I think it's a really important question to answer. Soybeans and soy products contain the greatest amount of isoflavones in our diet. That's where we can get isoflavones. And they are plant estrogens. So for human estrogen, it's sort of like their version, right? The plant's version of estrogen is called isoflavones. Now, they are not the same thing. So human estrogen and isoflavones are not the same. They don't act the same. If we ingest isoflavones, it doesn't act like human estrogen. It doesn't even influence human estrogen. So we're safe with that regard. Here's what we know, that isoflavones bind to receptors actually in our gut that are called the beta receptor, whereas our hormone estrogen that we make, it binds to the alpha receptor, which creates the cascade of biological effects. Isoflavones do not exert any effect that estrogen does. And here's what the science says. Women with breast cancer who eat soy foods may be less likely to see their cancer return and less likely to die from their disease. Soy foods in place of meat and other high saturated foods can help lower cholesterol. For those who have low thyroid function, soy foods, we recommend consuming them 1 to 3 hours after taking your thyroid medication. And soy foods may reduce the severity and duration of hot flashes. So it sounds like soy might be a good choice for us, right? Experts advise 2 to 3 servings per day. And that's exactly what the question was asking. That's what's recommended for safe consumption, but also to reap the benefits that we see from soy foods. So here are 2 to 3 servings. Here's, an image of what would constitute a serving, right? So a half a cup of tofu, a half a cup of edamame, and it lists the isoflavone content because that's what dietitians like to know. We like to look at those numbers. But just for your information, I would choose the top half of that list, right? Because as we work our way down to the bottom half of that list, I see a lot of highly processed soy foods, right? And that's not quite the same package of nutrition. So the resources I want to share first, I'm going to share some recipes. If you like pesto, you might like a sunflower seed pesto, right? And if you're looking to get some amino acids and proteins out of your pesto, that could be an option, right? So I wanted to share that with you. There's an image of on the top right of chilaquiles. It's a plant-based version. So it's using beans. It's a traditional Mexican recipe cooked in a skillet. But it's using, it's plant-based. So it's actually vegan. If you want to include some cheese on top, that would make it plant-based, right? And then some roasted vegetables. Why not saturate the body with something like sweet potatoes, which are certainly nutritious and delicious, but then also something like Brussels sprouts or broccoli to get those cruciferous vegetables into the body, which are really superstars in terms of cancer protection. These are some websites that I would advise how to control your blood sugars if you're going to go vegan, right? Because you're going to be eating a lot of high carbohydrate foods. So it's a great resource from diatribe.org if you're curious about that. A little bit more about blood sugar control. The Mediterranean diet seems to be very helpful too. And that's a version of a plant-based diet, right? Taylor Wolfram is a dietitian that specializes in vegan nutrition. And there's also, I can't recall her name at the moment. There's a vegan RD, and she has a great website that's very comprehensive with lots of great information for you if you're curious to explore that. So next month on June 7th, it's the first Friday of the month, same place, same time. We're going to be talking sprouting and fermenting food. So we thought that was an interesting topic. I hope you agree, and I hope you get to attend and ask your great questions as always. Thank you for giving me the time today to try to answer your questions that were submitted. I'm going to stop my share here.